In the highlands of Ethiopia, where jagged mountains meet mist-filled valleys and ancient monasteries cling to cliffsides like watchful sentinels, there lies one of the world's most mysterious literary treasures, the Ethiopian Bible. It is one of the oldest and most complete biblical canons on earth, preserved in the ancient Ge'ezi language and guarded for centuries by monks who dedicate their lives to its protection. For many, the Ethiopian canon is simply another historical variant of biblical tradition. But for other scholars, theologians, and curious minds, it is a library of forgotten knowledge, preserving texts that vanished from Western scripture long ago. Among these ancient writings, one book has always stood out: the conflict of Adam and Eve with Satan. Often called the Lost Book of Adam and Eve, for decades it was known only through incomplete translations, fragmented manuscripts, or whispered references in the corridors of theological research. But recent recoveries, restorations, and digitizations of Ethiopian manuscripts have brought this book back into the spotlight, and with it, a stunning narrative that challenges common understandings of humanity's earliest story. In this video, we will explore the rediscovery of this so-called lost book, why it exists only in a few traditions, and the terrifying secret it claims Adam and Eve learned after their expulsion from the garden. But before we dive into that secret, we must first walk through the world that preserved it. Please take this moment to like, subscribe, and share this video. Ethiopia has long been a custodian of ancient scripture. The country's Christian heritage stretches back to the 4th century CE, when King Ezana of the Aksumite Empire adopted Christianity, making Ethiopia one of the oldest Christian nations on earth. For centuries, monks preserved manuscripts by hand, copying and recopying them across generations, often illustrating them with vivid images that bring biblical scenes to life in ways that Western manuscripts never attempted. Their libraries, some hidden in remote monasteries accessible only by ropes or precarious ladders, hold treasures that have barely been cataloged. So when global scholars began digitizing Ethiopian manuscripts over the past several decades, they encountered something extraordinary: a nearly complete preserved version of the Book of Adam and Eve with narrative elements that had long been lost, altered, or omitted in other traditions. And what these texts reveal is astonishing. Unlike the familiar story found in Genesis, brief, concise, and symbolic, the Ethiopian account expands dramatically. Offering a full narrative of Adam and Eve's life after Eden, it describes their emotions, their struggles, their interactions with spiritual beings, and most strikingly, their direct confrontations with Satan himself. According to this ancient text, Satan's hatred for humanity is not merely a generalized rebellion against God. It is personal, targeted, and rooted in a moment that takes the story in a chilling direction. But before we explore that chilling moment, let's lay out the landscape of this rediscovered book. The conflict of Adam and Eve with Satan is not a single unified work. Instead, it is a compilation of traditions, stories, and teachings that circulated in the early centuries of Christianity and Judaism. It was likely composed between the 3rd and 5th centuries CE, although many elements appear far older. The Ethiopian version, however, is unique because it preserves the entire narrative in a coherent sequence, suggesting that Ethiopian scribes received a more complete version than other cultures. In Western tradition, the story of Adam and Eve ends abruptly after expulsion. The couple leaves the garden, Eve bears children, and humanity begins. But in the Ethiopian manuscripts, the expulsion is only the beginning. Adam and Eve's life outside Eden is told as a long ordeal, a series of emotional, physical, and spiritual trials that show the raw vulnerability of the first humans. And this is where the story takes a dramatic turn. According to the text, upon leaving Eden, Adam and Eve were confronted by something far more terrifying than physical hardship. They encountered Satan, enraged, humiliated, and determined to destroy them. The book records multiple attempts by Satan to deceive, harm, or manipulate the couple. But what's most shocking is the reason behind his hatred. In the Ethiopian text, Satan allegedly reveals a secret. His anger toward Adam and Eve stems from a heavenly command he refused to obey. According to this narrative, God created Adam in glory and commanded the angels to bow before humanity, not as worship, but as recognition of God's craftsmanship. While some angels obeyed, Satan refused, declaring that he would bow only to God, never to a creature made of dust. In this telling, his rebellion erupted not simply because of pride, but because of humanity, because of Adam. And so, when God cast him down, his hatred toward humanity became absolute. This idea does not appear in the canonical Bible, but it surfaces in several ancient traditions including writings from the Dead Sea Scrolls, early Jewish mysticism, and Syriac Christian literature. Yet the Ethiopian version presents one of the most detailed accounts, preserving elements long lost elsewhere. As scholars continued examining the manuscript, they noticed something else. The book contains descriptions of spiritual battles, cosmic decisions, and angelic interactions that align with other ancient traditions but contradict mainstream doctrine. It raises questions. Were these texts intentionally removed from Western canon? Were they considered too mystical, too controversial, or simply outside the accepted narrative of early Christianity? It's important to clarify that the Ethiopian Bible did not add these texts. Rather, it preserved what other traditions gradually lost or excluded. And because Ethiopia developed its Christian canon early and independently, its scriptures remain a window into beliefs circulating in the ancient Near East, long before Western canonization. But perhaps the most unsettling part of this rediscovery is that the text does not portray Adam and Eve as passive victims. Instead, it places them in the center of an unfolding spiritual war, one that continues, according to the text, throughout human history. As we move into Section 2, we'll explore the origins of this book, how it differs from other ancient writings, and why Ethiopia became the only major Christian tradition to preserve it in full. We will also examine how modern scholars verified these manuscripts and what they reveal about early religious beliefs. The story of the lost book of Adam and Eve cannot be understood without first examining how such a text survived intact and translated, and essentially uninterrupted in a single region of the world, Ethiopia. To modern readers, it may seem almost unbelievable that a work as ancient and provocative as this could vanish from most of the world yet remain fully preserved in the highlands of East Africa. But the historical journey of the Ethiopian Bible explains precisely how this happened, and why Ethiopia became a sanctuary for writings lost to time elsewhere. Ethiopia's Christian tradition is often described as unique. Not only is it among the oldest surviving Christian cultures, but it also developed largely independent of the theological and political debates that shaped Christianity in Europe and the Middle East. Unlike Rome or Constantinople, Ethiopia was never fully absorbed into the imperial church systems that determined which books belonged in the biblical canon and which did not. Instead, its canon grew alongside its own liturgical practices, monastic traditions, and scholarly lineage. So when Christianity reached Ethiopia around the 4th century CE, carried by missionaries such as Frumentius, who later became the first bishop of Axum, the scriptures of the early world were still in flux. There was no universally agreed upon canon. Different communities read different texts. Some embraced books like Enoch, Jubilees, and the Shepherd of Hermas. Others rejected them. Some relied on Greek manuscripts. Others used Syriac, Hebrew, or Latin versions. It was a period of tremendous diversity, a spiritual library far broader than the one most people know today. Into this environment came the text that would later be known as the Book of Adam and Eve. Scholars believe that the earliest forms of these writings circulated in Jewish and Christian communities across Egypt, Palestine, and Syria. Portions of these stories appear in early Jewish midrash, in Syriac Christian homilies, and in fragments passed down through the Coptic Church. But while these fragments survived in scattered pieces, only Ethiopia preserved the entire narrative as a complete book. Why? Because Ethiopia's early translators did something remarkable. They translated not only the emerging canon but also the surrounding literature texts that were popular, influential, or spiritually significant, even if they had not yet been formally classified as scripture. The resulting body of literature, translated into Ge'ez between the 4th and 7th centuries, became one of the richest collections of ancient Judeo-Christian writings in the world. These translations were not casual. Monks and scribes devoted their entire lives to copying manuscripts by hand, often working in remote monasteries carved into mountainsides. Many manuscripts were preserved in caves, stone churches, or structures carved directly from rock, as in the famous churches of Lalibela. Protected from the political turmoil that affected the Middle East and Europe, Ethiopia became what some scholars call a time capsule of early Christianity. This time capsule preserved not only canonical books but also works considered apocryphal or pseudepigraphal by other traditions. The Book of Enoch, for example, survives in full only in the Ethiopian canon. The Book of Jubilees, though lost in Hebrew and Greek, survives almost entirely in Ge'ez. And in the same way, the conflict of Adam and Eve with Satan, a book that was once widespread, remains most complete in Ethiopia alone. But how do we know these manuscripts are authentic? Over the past decades, scholars from institutions such as the University of Toronto, the Hill Museum and Manuscript Library, and Addis Ababa University have collaborated on large-scale manuscript digitization. They have scanned thousands of Ethiopian manuscripts, some over a millennium old, using advanced imaging techniques. Many of these manuscripts were never before accessible to the outside world. When researchers compared the Ethiopian Book of Adam and Eve with surviving fragments from Syriac, Arabic, and Greek traditions, they discovered something extraordinary. The Ethiopian version preserved storylines missing from every other source. It included episodes describing Adam and Eve's prayers after leaving Eden, detailed accounts of their encounters with Satan, and Adam's dialogues with God, passages that only existed in scholars' theories before these manuscripts were uncovered. This discovery reshaped the understanding of the text. Previously, Western scholars believed the book was a patchwork of later medieval stories. But the Ethiopian manuscripts demonstrated that the work originated far earlier and circulated widely in the ancient world. The Ethiopian version was not an expansion, it was a preservation of traditions others had lost. But if the book was so widespread, why did most traditions eventually stop using it? The answer lies in the gradual tightening of the biblical canon in the Western and Eastern churches. As Christianity became centralized under imperial rule, church leaders began defining orthodoxy with increasing strictness. Texts that were mystical, imaginative, or outside the developing doctrinal structure were gradually excluded. This included many works that today are labeled apocrypha. Over time, communities that once read these books stopped copying them. As manuscripts decayed, the books slowly disappeared. But Ethiopia, geographically isolated, politically independent, and spiritually conservative in its traditions, did not follow these trends. Instead, it kept its broader canon intact, treating these writings as spiritually valuable even if they were not part of liturgical scripture. The result is that Ethiopia now holds versions of ancient Judeo-Christian texts unavailable anywhere else in the world. So when the lost book of Adam and Eve was found in Ethiopia, it wasn't truly discovered for the first time, it was rediscovered by the outside world. Ethiopian scholars and monks had been preserving it all along. The implications of this rediscovery are profound. The Ethiopian version of the text contains narratives that Western traditions never encountered, dialogues between Adam and God, extensive confrontations with Satan, and descriptions of heavenly events that dramatically reshaped the understanding of humanity's earliest days. These passages challenge the simplicity of the Genesis account, suggesting a spiritual world far more active, complex, and conflict-driven than later traditions would admit. Yet perhaps the most intriguing revelation is not how the book survived but what its content reveals. The Ethiopian text does not merely retell the fall of Adam and Eve. It unveils motivations, secrets, and heavenly disputes that transform the story from a simple moral lesson into a cosmic drama. In Section 3, we will move beyond the history of the text and into the narrative itself. We will explore the earliest chapters of the book, Adam and Eve's first days outside Eden, their overwhelming grief, and their initial encounters with Satan, encounters that set the stage for the terrifying secret revealed later in the manuscript. When the Ethiopian book of Adam and Eve transitions from the expulsion narrative into the couple's life outside Eden, the tone of the text shifts dramatically. The short and symbolic wording of Genesis expands into a detailed, emotionally charged account that feels deeply human and profoundly tragic. According to the Ethiopian manuscript, Adam and Eve's first steps outside the garden mark the beginning of a long and painful awakening, one filled with fear, grief, and an unrelenting sense of spiritual displacement. The text begins by describing their physical and emotional collapse. Having lived in Eden, surrounded by divine light, perfect climate, and direct communion with God, the natural world outside the garden felt brutally unfamiliar. The Ethiopian book describes the couple trembling uncontrollably, unable to bear the harshness of sunlight, the coldness of wind, or even the unevenness of the ground. Their bodies, once radiant with the glory of Eden, now felt fragile, exposed, and painfully mortal. In this account, they wept not for minutes, but for hours, even days. Adam cries out to God repeatedly, asking why he was created at all if suffering awaited him. Eve, overwhelmed with guilt, blames herself for everything, for listening to the serpent, for convincing Adam to eat the fruit, for the loss of Eden. The text emphasizes their emotions in a way that few ancient writings do. These are not distant mythic figures, but deeply wounded humans facing a world they do not know how to survive in. One of the first details that stands out in the Ethiopian version is how Adam and Eve respond spiritually. Rather than simply wandering the earth, they begin with a deliberate act of repentance. According to the manuscript, Adam throws himself upon the ground and prays with such intensity that the earth shakes. Eve joins him, begging God for forgiveness with cries so loud that they echo through the valley. The book describes their prayers in poetic detail, Adam's voice breaking, Eve's hands lifted toward heaven, their tears soaking the earth. These scenes are far more emotionally vivid than the Genesis narrative. They depict Adam and Eve not as passive figures in a simple story, but as spiritual beings experiencing their first confrontation with sorrow, fear, and separation from the divine. It is during these prayers and during this emotional vulnerability that Satan makes his move. The Ethiopian text makes it clear that Satan had been waiting for this moment with burning hatred. The manuscript describes him watching the couple from a distance, seething with rage at their very existence. And now, weakened by grief and confusion, Adam and Eve become targets of his deception. The first appearance of Satan in the Ethiopian book is deceptive, almost gentle. Disguised as an angel of light, he approaches the couple with softened voice and false compassion. The text says his brightness was nearly indistinguishable from that of the angels Adam had seen in Eden. His intent was simple: to trick Adam and Eve into believing God had changed his mind and wanted them to return to the garden. This moment is among the most striking in the entire manuscript. Satan tells them, "God has sent me to bring you back into paradise." Adam, still new to deception, still desperate for forgiveness, almost believes him. He falls to his knees in gratitude, thanking God for mercy. Eve begins to weep again, overwhelmed by the hope of return. For a moment, it seems the couple is ready to follow Satan back toward the gates of Eden, but this is where the manuscript takes an illuminating turn. Just as Adam begins to step forward, God sends his true angels to stop him. According to the Ethiopian text, a radiant light descends, illuminating the valley. The real angels rebuke Satan, exposing him for the deceiver he is. They warn Adam and Eve not to trust any entity that does not come directly from God. This confrontation reveals two major themes that continue throughout the book. 1. Satan's hatred for Adam is personal and relentless. He is not simply a force of evil, but a being driven by wounded pride and divine rejection. 2. Adam and Eve are spiritually vulnerable, learning for the first time how to detect deception, fear, and false hope. Once Satan's disguise is exposed, Adam collapses into despair again, not only because he nearly fell for the trick, but because the promise of returning to Eden had been snatched away so cruelly. Eve also breaks down, realizing how easily they can be manipulated in this new world. At this moment, the Ethiopian text describes something unexpected. God speaks directly to Adam, reassuring him that although Eden is now closed, he has not abandoned humanity. God explains that Adam's spiritual growth must now take place outside the garden, through struggle, obedience, and perseverance. In this narrative, suffering is not punishment, it is preparation. These early chapters reveal a theological concept largely absent from the Genesis account: the idea that Adam and Eve's journey is a spiritual training ground, a formative battle between divine purpose and satanic opposition. This is perhaps why the Ethiopian community considered the text valuable. It explores the emotional and spiritual dimensions of humanity's origins in a way that Western canon later avoided. After this encounter, Adam and Eve attempt to build their first shelter, struggling with thorns, stones, and the harshness of the natural world. They discover hunger for the first time, thirst for the first time, and the exhaustion of physical labor. Each experience is described with vivid detail, emphasizing how foreign these sensations were to them. At one point, overwhelmed by despair, Adam resolves to return to the gate of Eden and beg God once more for mercy. The Ethiopian text describes the scene: Adam walking toward the garden, tears streaming down his face, calling out to God with a voice cracked from grief. Eve follows behind, holding on to him, fearing that Satan will strike them again. But what happens next sets the stage for the book's most terrifying revelation. As Adam and Eve approach the edge of Eden, a place now guarded by an angel with a sword of fire, Satan makes a second attempt. This time he appears not as an angel but as a terrifying creature of darkness, roaring like thunder. He tries to intimidate the couple, driving them away from the garden not through deception but through fear. The text describes his presence as overwhelming, cold, and deeply unnatural. It is during this confrontation that Satan makes a startling accusation, one that hints at the secret he will reveal later. He tells Adam, "You stole the glory that was mine." Adam, confused and terrified, does not understand. But the statement lingers, echoing ominously through the pages that follow. This moment begins to unravel the mystery at the heart of the Ethiopian book, a cosmic conflict not simply between good and evil, but between Satan and humanity, rooted in events that occurred long before Eden. In Section 4, we will examine this emerging conflict more closely. We will explore Satan's deepening hostility, his attempts to physically harm Adam and Eve, and the manuscript's expanding explanation of why this hatred exists at all. As the Ethiopian book of Adam and Eve progresses, the narrative broadens beyond the emotional struggles of the first humans. The text begins to reveal a cosmic drama that stretches far beyond Eden's boundaries, a conflict shaped by jealousy, rebellion, and celestial hierarchy. Section 3 concluded with Satan's ominous words to Adam, "You took my place." Now, Section 4 explores how this rivalry deepens into violence, deception, and relentless spiritual warfare. "You took my place." To understand this escalation, the manuscript pauses the earthly story and shifts upward to events that took place in heaven long before God created Adam. According to the Ethiopian text, the roots of Satan's rage lie in a divine command that reshaped the order of the celestial world. When God created Adam, the manuscript says, He clothed him in a luminous glory reminiscent of the angels. God then instructed the heavenly hosts to honor Adam's creation by bowing before him not in worship, but in recognition of the new being created in God's image. Most angels obeyed, but one refused, Satan. The text explains this defiance with striking detail. Satan, described as once being among the highest-ranking angels, could not accept the idea of bowing before a creature made of clay. His pride, already simmering, erupted into open rebellion. He proclaimed, "I will never bow to one inferior to me. I am spirit, he is dust." This declaration, according to the manuscript, triggered a cosmic split among the heavenly hosts. Some followed Satan in his rebellion, others remained loyal to God. Ethiopian tradition, much like ancient Jewish and Syriac writings, holds that this act of defiance led to Satan's downfall. Cast out of heaven along with his followers, he plummeted to the lower realms in fury, and it was in this fury that he vowed revenge against the one whose creation triggered his fall, Adam. This narrative varies from the familiar biblical portrayal, but parallels can be found in multiple ancient traditions, including early Christian homilies, apocryphal texts, and fragments associated with the Dead Sea Scrolls. What makes the Ethiopian version unique is its integration of these traditions into a single, continuous story frame, not as myth but as a serious explanation for the origin of evil. After recounting these heavenly events, the manuscript returns to Adam and Eve's life on earth. In the Ethiopian text, Satan's second attack had already exposed his fury, but now, his hostility intensifies. No longer content with deception, Satan attempts to harm the couple physically. One of the earliest and most dramatic episodes is his attempt to kill Adam by pushing him off a high cliff. The text describes this moment with emotional intensity. Adam, seeking solace, climbs a mountain to pray, only for Satan to appear, invisible, and shove him over the edge. Adam falls, his body crashing onto the rocks below. Eve, hearing his cry, rushes to him and collapses in grief, believing him dead. The manuscript describes her anguish in poetic detail, her trembling hands, her cries echoing through the valley, her desperate attempt to lift Adam's lifeless body. But then God intervenes. In one of the manuscript's most striking scenes, God sends an angel to restore Adam. The angel lifts him, breathes life into him, and heals his broken limbs. Adam awakens startled but alive, and Eve embraces him with overwhelming relief. This event conveys two important themes: humanity's vulnerability and divine protection. The manuscript emphasizes that while Satan possesses real power, he is ultimately restrained and able to destroy Adam entirely because God does not permit it. Enraged by his failure, Satan shifts tactics once more. He turns his attention to Eve, hoping to manipulate her emotions. According to the Ethiopian text, Satan appears to Eve in the form of a beautiful woman, offering comfort and companionship. He speaks softly, pretending to understand her suffering. Eve, recognizing neither the disguise nor the threat, speaks with him briefly. But the moment she turns away, Satan transforms again, this time into a monstrous creature. He unleashes a terrifying roar, sending Eve fleeing in panic. The text describes this moment as Eve's first encounter with pure terror. She collapses near Adam, shaking uncontrollably, believing the creature will kill them both. Adam, seeing her distress, prays for protection, and once again God intervenes, sending an angel to repel the demonic presence. This cycles Satan's deception, Adam and Eve's vulnerability, and God's protective intervention forms a recurring pattern throughout the book. But with each encounter, Satan grows more direct, more hostile, and more determined. His hatred is no longer a background element, it is the driving force of his actions. One of the most profound insights in this section is the manuscript's exploration of Satan's psychological state. Unlike the Western biblical tradition, which often portrays Satan as a distant, symbolic adversary, the Ethiopian text depicts him as a deeply emotional, almost tragic figure. He is furious, humiliated, dreadful, wounded, all because Adam's creation disrupted the heavenly order he believed himself entitled to. The manuscript goes even further. It suggests that Satan was not merely jealous of Adam's creation. He feared something greater, that Adam and his descendants would one day rise above the angels in divine favor. This idea, though rare in Western scripture, appears in several ancient writings that hint at humanity's elevated potential. As Satan's hostility escalates, Adam and Eve begin to understand the seriousness of their situation. They realize their existence is no longer merely a story of survival, it is part of a cosmic conflict that began long before they were created. They learn that Satan's hatred will not fade, that his attempts to deceive or destroy them will continue, and that humanity must navigate the world with caution, discernment, and prayer. This spiritual awakening marks an important transition in the manuscript. Adam and Eve do not grow stronger physically, but spiritually. Their prayers become more structured, their devotion more persistent, their awareness of spiritual forces more acute. The text portrays their growth not as triumph but as endurance, an endurance that will shape the future of their descendants. Toward the end of this section, the manuscript records one of Satan's most revealing statements. After failing in multiple attempts to destroy Adam, Satan confronts him angrily and declares, "Because of you, I fell from my glory. Because of you, I was driven out of heaven." This confession gives Adam his first glimpse into Satan's motives. Adam, stunned, asks God why he was chosen over the angels. God responds with a cryptic but powerful message: humanity is destined for a spiritual journey. Angels cannot undertake a journey shaped by struggle, repentance, and redemption. With these revelations, the stage is set for the book's next and most dramatic phase. In Section 5 we will explore the manuscript's detailed account of Adam and Eve's extreme penances, their physical self-denial, their rigorous spiritual rituals, and the astonishing moment when Satan reveals the full terrifying secret behind his rebellion. Section 4 closed with a chilling moment, Satan directly admitting that his fall from heaven was tied to Adam's creation. This revelation leaves Adam bewildered and Eve deeply shaken. The Ethiopian book of Adam and Eve now shifts into one of its most intense and emotionally gripping sequences, the story of Adam and Eve's extreme penances. These rituals, described in vivid detail, reveal the depth of their grief, their longing for redemption, and their attempt to restore what was lost in Eden. But it is during this period of fasting, pain, and spiritual struggle that Satan finally reveals the full terrifying truth behind his hatred. The text begins with Adam and Eve's solemn resolution to seek complete forgiveness from God. They believe that if they can demonstrate absolute devotion even to the point of death, God may reopen the gates of Eden. It is a tragic misunderstanding, but it shapes one of the most dramatic episodes in the entire manuscript. The Ethiopian text describes Adam approaching Eve with a plan that shocks her. He tells her that he will enter the Jordan River and stand there in fasting and prayer for 40 days and 40 nights. Eve, not wanting to remain behind, declares that she too will undergo her own penance standing in the Tigris River for the same length of time. The imagery of these scenes is powerful. Adam enters the cold waters of the Jordan until they reach his neck. Eve does the same in the Tigris. Their bodies tremble, their skin burns from the cold, and the manuscript says they remain partially submerged day and night, refusing food, refusing rest, refusing even to sit. The rivers become symbols of purification, but also places of immense suffering. Night after night, Adam cries out to God, his voice echoing softly over the water. Eve whispers prayers through chattering teeth, her body growing weaker with each passing day. But as Adam and Eve undertake these brutal penances, Satan sees an opportunity. The manuscript describes him watching from a distance, astonished by the couple's endurance. He grows fearful that their devotion might draw them closer to God, closer than he ever was. This fear provokes him into action. Disguising himself once more, he approaches Eve first, knowing she is physically weaker, isolated, and emotionally vulnerable. He appears to her as a gentle figure, speaking in soft, sympathetic tones. He tells her that God has already accepted their penance, that she has suffered enough, and that she must leave the river before she dies. Eve, exhausted and near collapse, almost listens. But as she begins to step out of the water, God sends an angel to stop her. The angel rebukes Satan and warns Eve not to abandon her vow. Foiled in this attempt, Satan grows enraged. The manuscript describes his face twisting with fury as he storms away from the riverbank. His hatred toward humanity grows yet deeper, not only because Adam exists, but because Adam and Eve refuse to break under pressure. So Satan tries again. This time, he approaches Adam directly. The Ethiopian text makes clear that Satan uses a strategy specifically designed to break Adam's resolve: fear. He transforms himself into a terrifying serpent-like creature with enormous wings, eyes burning like fire, and a voice that echoes like thunder over water. He approaches the Jordan River and roars, "Adam, leave the water, or I will kill you." Adam, startled but unwavering, refuses to break his fast. Instead, he calls out to God for protection. The moment he does, an angel descends with blazing light, driving Satan away once more. It is after this failed confrontation that Satan reaches a breaking point. Cornered, enraged, and unable to sway either Adam or Eve, he returns to Adam in a different form, not to deceive, but to confess. His confession is one of the most disturbing passages in the entire Ethiopian manuscript. The text describes Satan appearing before Adam in a flash of dark fire. His voice is no longer deceptive, it is trembling with bitterness. He says, "Adam, understand why I hate you. It is because of you that I fell from my glory. It is because I would not bow to you, a creature made of dust." Adam, deeply confused, asks Satan why such a command would exist at all. Why would God require angels to bow to him? Why would humanity become the center of such a cosmic dispute? And here, Satan reveals the terrifying secret that the Ethiopian manuscript preserves. He tells Adam that God had shown the heavenly host a vision of the future in which humanity would rise to a place of honor above the angels themselves. A future where God would one day take human form, not angelic form, and dwell among Adam's descendants. A future where salvation would come through humanity, not through the angels. This revelation shattered Satan's pride. The text emphasizes that Satan could not accept a world in which a being made of physical material earth, dust, and bone would be elevated above him. Satan concludes his confession with a chilling declaration: "I will never allow your descendants to reach the glory God promised them." This, according to the Ethiopian manuscript, is the root of Satan's war against humanity, not merely revenge, but an attempt to prevent humanity from fulfilling a divine destiny. Adam, overwhelmed by this revelation, collapses into despair. He weeps not only for himself, but for humanity's future, realizing that his mistake in Eden triggered a cosmic conflict with consequences far greater than suffering or exile. Eve, when she learns the secret, falls into deep sorrow as well. Yet the manuscript emphasizes that God does not reveal this destiny to punish them, but to prepare them, to show them that their spiritual struggle has meaning far beyond their own lives. As Adam and Eve emerge from the rivers, exhausted but spiritually strengthened, God sends angels to comfort them. They help Adam stand, wrap Eve in warm garments, and guide them back toward their shelter. The angels reassure the couple that although Satan's hatred is fierce, humanity is under divine protection. God will never abandon them. Their descendants will have the opportunity to rise, to overcome temptation, and to reclaim the glory originally intended for them. With this revelation, the manuscript shifts direction. Adam and Eve no longer see themselves as mere victims of exile. They understand that they are the first players in a spiritual battle that will unfold across all generations. Their story now becomes one of instruction, preparation, and the establishment of practices that their children and all of humanity will one day follow. In this next section, we will move into the next phase of the manuscript, the birth of Adam and Eve as children, the rise of Cain and Abel, and the continuing interference of Satan in humanity's earliest family. The revelation Satan confessed during Adam and Eve's great penance marks a turning point in the Ethiopian book of Adam and Eve. From this point forward, the manuscript transitions from the story of two individuals to the story of a growing human family, but one still living under the shadow of a cosmic conflict that began long before their creation. Section 6 begins with Adam and Eve leaving the rivers of penance and returning to their humble shelter, battered in body but strengthened in spirit. What follows is the birth of humanity as first children and the unfolding tragedy that reshapes the future of mankind. According to the Ethiopian text, Adam and Eve's return from the rivers is met with divine reassurance. Angels visit them more frequently, offering guidance on how to live in the harsh, unfamiliar world outside Eden. These angels teach them how to gather food, how to build sturdier shelters, and how to protect themselves from dangers both physical and spiritual. The manuscript emphasizes that God did not abandon them to suffering. Rather, He began preparing them for the challenges that humanity would face in the centuries to come. It is during this time of gradual adjustment that Eve becomes pregnant with her first child. The text describes this experience with a mixture of joy, fear, and wonder. Eve, who had never experienced physical pain in Eden, is terrified of the strange movements within her. Adam, though supportive, is equally unsure of what to expect. They turn to God repeatedly for guidance, asking for strength and understanding as Eve's body changes. When the time comes for Eve to give birth, the manuscript describes the process as painful and overwhelming. Adam, desperate to help, runs outside their shelter and prays for God's mercy. According to the text, God sends several angels who appear as midwives, offering comfort and instruction. With their assistance, Eve gives birth to her firstborn son Cain. The birth of Cain is a monumental moment in the manuscript. Eve, holding her newborn child, expresses a mixture of relief and awe. She says, in words that echo ancient tradition, "I have gotten a man through God." Adam rejoices, believing the child is a sign of hope and redemption. But what neither Adam nor Eve realizes is that Satan, still seething with hatred, is watching the birth with deep resentment. The Ethiopian text makes it clear that Satan views Cain not just as a child, but as the first link in a lineage that threatens his rebellion. His hostility toward Adam extends naturally to Adam's offspring. He vows that if he cannot destroy Adam directly, he will destroy Adam's line, beginning with his firstborn. Sometime later, Eve becomes pregnant again, and the manuscript provides a tender description of her second pregnancy. This time, Eve feels less fear and more confidence. Adam stays close to her, tending to her needs, and both of them pray frequently for God's protection over their growing family. When Eve gives birth to her second son Abel, there is less struggle, less fear. Abel enters the world peacefully, and the narrative describes him as gentle from the beginning, a child with a calm spirit. As Cain and Abel grow, their personalities develop in ways that reflect the symbolic roles they would later occupy in one of humanity's oldest stories. The Ethiopian text describes Cain as strong, headstrong, and often restless. He has a tendency to wander, to question instructions, and to grow frustrated easily. Abel, by contrast, is portrayed as obedient, reflective, and deeply spiritual. He spends long hours in prayer, even as a young boy, and seems naturally drawn to peace and quiet. Adam and Eve, still learning how to navigate parenting in a world filled with dangers, try their best to raise their sons with love and discipline. But the manuscript emphasizes that because of Satan's continued resentment, the family is never fully free from spiritual threats. Satan begins visiting Cain in subtle ways, whispering to him, stirring his jealousy, planting seeds of doubt and anger in his young mind. One of the Ethiopian text's most striking differences from the Genesis account is its detailed explanation of Satan's direct involvement in Cain's corruption. Rather than portraying Cain's eventual violence as merely a personal flaw, the manuscript describes Satan actively manipulating him. Satan appears to Cain in dreams, twisting his perception of himself and his brother. He tells Cain that Adam loves Abel more. He whispers that Abel will one day rule over him. He fills Cain's thoughts with envy, then hides in the shadows, feeding that envy until it grows into something darker. Meanwhile, Abel grows closer to God, The Ethiopian text describes Abel as often stepping away from the family to pray on hilltops or near streams. He sings hymns of gratitude, thanking God for life, food, and safety. His gentle nature brings a sense of peace to Adam and Eve, who worrying about the growing distance between their two sons. Adam frequently speaks to Cain, trying to correct his behavior and teach him patience. Eve tries to soothe him with affection, but the rift widens. One of the manuscript's most powerful scenes occurs when Adam teaches his sons how to offer sacrifices to God. He explains that offerings are a form of gratitude, a way to acknowledge God's mercy and protection. Cain listens, but with impatience. Abel listens with reverence. When the time comes for each to offer their first sacrifice, the difference becomes stark. Cain gathers the leftover grains from his field dry, ordinary, and lacking care. He piles them together and sets them before God. Abel, however, selects the best of his flock. He chooses a flawless lamb, one he raised with care, and offers it as a sign of pure devotion. According to the Ethiopian manuscript, God accepts Abel's sacrifice with a visible sign of approval, perhaps a divine fire or heavenly light, depending on the manuscript version. Abel rejoices, falling to his knees in gratitude. Cain watches in growing bitterness, his face darkening with rage. It is in this moment of Cain's emotional collapse that Satan makes his most decisive move. The manuscript describes Satan appearing beside Cain not as a monster, not as a serpent, but as a seemingly ordinary man. He places a hand on Cain's shoulder and whispers, "See, God favors Abel. You are nothing to him. Your father loves Abel more. Your mother praises him. Abel will take everything from you." Cain, already on edge, listens. His anger intensifies. His breathing grows heavy, his thoughts spiral. The Ethiopian text reveals that Cain does not strike Abel in a moment of spontaneous rage but in a state of spiritual manipulation. Satan leads him away from the family home, urging him to confront Abel in the fields. The scene unfolds with tragic inevitability. Cain, consumed by jealousy, attacks Abel, killing him in an act of violence that echoes through heaven itself. The manuscript describes Adam and Eve's grief with heartbreaking detail. Eve collapses, wailing in agony for her lost son. Adam tears his garments, lifting Abel's lifeless body and crying out to God in anguish. The angels mourn. The ground itself trembles. This moment marks humanity's first true tragedy, and the manuscript emphasizes that it was not merely a family dispute, but the first major victory in Satan's war against humanity. In Section 7, we will explore the aftermath of Abel's death, Cain's punishment, the deep sorrow that nearly destroys Adam and Eve, and the surprising rise of a new child, Seth, whose destiny will carry the divine promise forward. The death of Abel marks a watershed moment in the Ethiopian book of Adam and Eve. Everything that humanity has endured until now, exile from Eden, harsh survival, spiritual warfare, pales in comparison to the emotional devastation unleashed by this tragedy. Section 7 begins with a somber, heart-wrenching atmosphere. The manuscript lingers on the grief of Adam and Eve, describing it not as a moment of sorrow but as a season of profound anguish that nearly destroys the first family. When Adam finds Abel's lifeless body in the field, the Ethiopian text describes him collapsing to the ground in disbelief. The narrative emphasizes Adam's shock. Up until this moment, death was a concept he understood only as a distant warning from God. Now it lay before him in the form of his beloved son, silent, cold, and unmoving. Adam's cries echo across the valley, filled with an agony deeper than anything he had experienced since leaving Eden. Eve's reaction is even more emotionally vivid. The manuscript recounts that when she reaches Abel's body, she clings to him, refusing to let go. She cries out, my son, what have I done to bring forth death into the world?" The text portrays Eve's grief as almost overwhelming, blurring the line between mourning and madness. She blames herself for Abel's death, just as she once blamed herself for the fall from Eden. Her sorrow is so intense that Adam must physically hold her to keep her from harming herself. The manuscript states that the angels themselves mourn Abel. Heavenly beings gather around the grieving parents, offering comfort and explaining that Abel's soul has ascended to a place of rest, one of the earliest hints in ancient literature of humanity's post-mortem destiny. God also speaks directly to Adam, telling him that Abel is safe, that he suffers no more, and that his righteousness will be remembered for generations. But the comfort, though divine, does not heal Adam and Eve instantly. Their grief shapes the next chapter of humanity's story. The Ethiopian text lingers on the burial of Abel, describing it as the first funeral in human history. Adam digs a grave with his own hands that once tended Eden's perfect garden but now claw at dry earth in desperation. Eve prepares Abel's body, wrapping him gently and kissing his forehead again and again. The manuscript describes her tears falling onto Abel's face, mixing with the dust, forming small patches of mud. These details emphasize the raw humanity of the moment. Once the grave is filled, Adam and Eve sit beside it for days, refusing to eat. They fall into deep sadness, believing that not only have they lost a son, but that humanity's destiny has been derailed. Adam wonders whether he has failed as a father. Eve wonders whether God will abandon them entirely. Their grief is compounded by another fear: Cain has fled, disappearing into the wilderness. According to the Ethiopian manuscript, Cain wanders far from his family, tormented but unrepentant. God confronts him, not with rage, but with sorrow. The text parallels the Genesis account. God marks Cain, not as punishment alone, but as protection, ensuring that no one who encounters him will kill him. Yet the Ethiopian version adds deeper emotional commentary. Cain weeps when he realizes the gravity of what he has done, but still refuses to return home. Satan, seeing Cain alone and broken, remains close to him, whispering lies and ensuring Cain never fully turns back to God or his parents. Meanwhile, Adam and Eve try to rebuild their lives, though the manuscript makes clear that Abel's death haunted them for years. Their sorrow becomes a constant presence, a shadow that shapes their daily choices, their prayers, and their fears about raising future children. Eve especially is described as fearful of conceiving again. She believes any child she bears might fall under satanic influence, or worse, meet the same fate as Abel. But God intervenes with a message of hope. After a long season of mourning, an angel appears before Adam and Eve. The angel tells them that although Abel is gone, God will raise up another child through whom the divine promise will continue. This child, the angel says, will be a comfort to them and a righteous heir to Abel's legacy. The message softens their grief, but it comes slowly. Only with time, prayer, and divine encouragement does Eve begin to see motherhood not as a risk but as a blessing once more. When he finally conceives again, the manuscript describes her pregnancy with unique symbolism. Her movements are lighter, her anxiety lessens. Adam prays over her every day, asking God to bless the child within her. The couple's grief, though still present, begins to transform into renewed anticipation. When the time comes for Eve to give birth, the Ethiopian text describes a serene and hopeful scene. Angels once again appear to assist her, guiding her through the pain. Adam waits anxiously outside their shelter, praying fervently for a safe delivery. When he finally brings forth their new son, she names him Seth, a name meaning appointed or granted. She says, "God has given me another child in place of Abel." Seth's birth marks a major turning point in the manuscript. From his earliest days, the text describes Seth as peaceful, wise, and spiritually attuned. Unlike Cain, Seth is not restless or easily angered. Unlike Abel, whose purity drew Satan's direct hostility, Seth is portrayed as quietly resilient, a child destined for spiritual leadership. Adam and Eve poured their love into Seth. They raise him with the lessons learned from Abel's innocence and Cain's corruption. Adam teaches Seth how to offer sacrifices with reverence. Eve teaches him prayer and discipline. Seth listens obediently, absorbing their teachings with a maturity that surprises them. The manuscript describes Seth as a joy to their hearts and a comfort in their sorrow. But as Seth grows, the Ethiopian text introduces a new theme: the beginning of two distinct lineages, one tied to righteousness, one tied to rebellion. Seth's descendants will eventually become the keepers of God's promise, while Cain's descendants, living far away under Satan's increasing influence, will drift deeper into violence, pride, and spiritual blindness. This division begins here, quietly but significantly, as Seth matures into a young man of faith. Adam sees in him the hope of future generations. Eve sees in him the possibility of redemption. Even the angels rejoice over Seth, recognizing that God's plan for humanity is not lost. Yet Satan does not withdraw. The manuscript emphasizes that although he failed to destroy Adam directly, and though he succeeded in corrupting Cain, his ultimate goal remains unchanged: to stop humanity from reaching the destiny God promised. With Seth's birth, Satan shifts his strategy. No longer focused solely on destruction, he begins plotting long-term corruption, planting seeds of temptation not just for individuals, but for entire lineages. Section 7 concludes with a sense of cautious hope. Adam and Eve's grief has softened, but the world remains dangerous. Their new son represents not just comfort, but responsibility. Seth's life and the generations that will follow him will determine the direction humanity ultimately takes. Now sit still as we will explore the lives of Adam and Eve after Seth's birth, Adam's teachings to his children, the beginnings of early human culture, and Satan's renewed strategies to undermine humanity on a generational scale. With the birth of Seth, the Ethiopian book of Adam and Eve enters a new phase, one focused not merely on survival or grief, but on the construction of humanity's earliest culture. Adam and Eve, now older, wiser, and deeply shaped by their experiences, take on a new role: teachers. Section 8 explores how the first parents guide their children into a world filled with both divine guidance and spiritual danger. It also reveals the beginning of Satan's long-term strategy, an attempt not just to destroy individuals but to corrupt entire generations. The manuscript begins this chapter by describing the gradual healing of Adam and Eve's hearts. Seth's presence becomes a constant source of comfort. His gentle nature and thirst for spiritual truth bring peace into the family home. Although the memory of Abel's death remains painful, the couple now channels their energy into shaping Seth into a righteous leader who can carry the divine promise forward. Adam, aware of his role as the first patriarch, begins to formalize teachings that will become the foundation of early human culture. The Ethiopian text describes Adam gathering Seth and his younger siblings, daughters, and sons born after him, and teaching them about God, angels, and the cosmic conflict that began before creation. He tells them about Eden, about the forbidden fruit, about their expulsion, and about the stakes of human obedience. The lessons Adam imparts are vivid and emotional. The manuscript describes him pointing toward the distant horizon where the garden lies hidden behind a barrier of divine fire. He tells his children, "There is the place we once walked with God. One day, humanity will walk with him again, but only through righteousness." These moments form the earliest religious instruction in the manuscript, and they paint Adam not simply as a character in a story, but as the first prophet of humanity. Eve also plays a crucial role in shaping their children's spiritual and moral lives. The text describes her teaching the children how to pray, how to work the land, how to maintain peace within the family. Her lessons are shaped heavily by the mistakes of the past. She tells them honestly about her encounter with the serpent in Eden, and how easily deception can enter the human heart. With tears in her eyes, she warns them against pride, impulsiveness, and rebellion, traits that led Cain down a destructive path. But even as Adam and Eve nurture their growing family, the manuscript makes it clear that Satan has not given up his war against humanity. Having failed in his direct attacks on Adam, and having already claimed Cain as a tragic victory, Satan now shifts from short-term sabotage to long-term strategy. His new plan is subtle: influence entire lineages, shape human culture away from God, and slowly guide future generations toward corruption. The text hints that Satan begins this strategy by focusing on Cain's descendants. Living far from Adam and Eve, Cain builds a separate settlement in the wilderness, one isolated, prideful, and increasingly influenced by Satan's whispers. The manuscript does not elaborate extensively on Cain's lineage here, but it establishes a clear contrast. While Seth's descendants walk in righteousness, Cain's descendants slip gradually into violence, greed, and spiritual blindness. Back in Adam's family home, Seth grows into a young man of integrity. The Ethiopian text describes him as possessing a deep spiritual sensitivity. He often retreats into quiet places to pray, lifting his face to the heavens and seeking God's guidance. Angels appear to him regularly, offering comfort and insight. These moments suggest that Seth is not merely replacing Abel, he is becoming the spiritual cornerstone of the human race. One significant episode occurs when Adam takes Seth to the border of Eden. The text describes a journey filled with both anticipation and reverence. Adam wants Seth to witness the garden firsthand, not to enter it, but to understand the glory that humanity lost. When they arrive, the sight overwhelms Seth. The Ethiopian manuscript describes the garden as glowing with brilliant light, its gates guarded by a towering angel whose sword of fire illuminates the sky. Seth falls to his knees in awe. Adam weeps quietly beside him, remembering the days when he walked freely among those trees. He tells Seth, "One day, Your descendants will see this place again. But not through strength, not through desire. Only through obedience to God. These words form a cornerstone of Seth's spiritual mission. This moment also signals the beginning of a sacred tradition. Adam instructs Seth to pass down stories of Eden to future generations, ensuring that the memory of humanity's origins never fades. Seth accepts the responsibility with humility, marking the beginning of early human oral tradition. As Seth grows older, the manuscript describes him as becoming a leader among his siblings. He encourages them to remain united, peaceful, and focused on spiritual growth. Adam, seeing Seth's maturity, teaches him more deeply about the heavenly conflict Satan revealed the war over humanity's future. Seth listens intently, recognizing that his role in this conflict is far greater than he previously understood. Yet Satan watches all of this with growing frustration. Every righteous act, every prayer, every moment of unity within Adam's family is a reminder that humanity's destiny is still unfolding despite his efforts to derail it. The manuscript describes Satan brooding in the wilderness, surrounded by his fallen companions, planning his next move. He knows he cannot directly kill Adam. He knows he cannot easily deceive Seth. So he begins to consider another strategy, attacking humanity through subtle corruption, temptation, and distraction. The narrative hints that Satan begins influencing the environment itself, causing thorns to grow thicker, storms to become more violent, and venomous creatures to appear. Whether interpreted literally or symbolically, this detail reinforces the manuscript's theme of spiritual warfare embedded within the natural world. Humanity must now navigate a landscape shaped not only by physical survival, but by invisible forces seeking to weaken their resolve. As the family grows larger and generations begin to form, Adam calls his children together once more for a major instruction. The manuscript describes this as Adam's great teaching, a foundational moment where he sets rules for worship, sacrifice, marriage, and community life. He emphasizes love, unity, hard work, and obedience to God. But the text also reveals that Adam senses his own life is approaching its final season. He becomes more contemplative, more urgent in his teachings. Eve notices this as well. The manuscript states that Adam begins to feel the weight of mortality, a reality he fully understands after Abel's death. Seth, seeing the growing frailty of his father, steps further into his role as the spiritual heir. Toward the end of section 8, the manuscript presents one of its most profound narrative shifts, the recognition that humanity is growing, spreading, and evolving into separate communities with separate destinies. Seth's descendants will become the keepers of righteousness. Cain's descendants will become the seed of corruption. And Satan, seeing these two lines diverge, begins preparing for his next major plan, one that will affect the entire human race. In section 9, we will explore Adam's final days, his last message to his children, and the moment when he reveals to Seth the hidden prophecy about humanity's ultimate redemption, a prophecy that connects Adam's story directly to the future of all mankind. As humanity enters its earliest generations, the Ethiopian book of Adam and Eve moves into one of its most solemn and spiritually rich chapters, the final days of Adam. The first man who has walked through Eden's perfection, endured exile, confronted Satan, and witnessed the first human death now senses that his long journey on earth is nearing its end. Section 9 unfolds with a tone of reverence and quiet gravity, capturing the emotional weight of Adam's last teachings and the extraordinary prophecy he entrusts to Seth before he dies. The manuscript opens this section by describing Adam in his old age. His body, once strong and radiant, is now weakened by centuries of toil and grief. His hair has grown white, his steps are slow and measured. Yet his eyes retain a profound clarity. He has seen more than any human who came after him: creation, rebellion, divine glory, and human tragedy. And he understands that his life carries meaning far beyond himself. The Ethiopian text emphasizes that Adam does not fear death, not in the way his descendants would. Instead, he feels a deep sense of responsibility. He wants to leave his children with knowledge that will protect them in the future, knowledge that reveals where humanity came from, what forces oppose it, and what destiny awaits it. This wisdom, the manuscript suggests, is not simply historical, it is prophetic. One day, Adam summons Seth to his side. Seth, now a mature spiritual leader in his own right, recognizes the seriousness in his father's voice. Adam asks him to gather the entire family, their brothers and sisters, their children, and the first of their grandchildren. The text describes a large gathering, the first family, now spanning multiple generations, sitting quietly around Adam's resting place, waiting for the final teaching of humanity's first parent. Adam begins by recounting his life, starting from the very beginning. He tells them about his creation, not merely that God formed him, but how it felt to open his eyes for the first time and behold divine light. He describes the beauty of Eden, the gentle presence of angels, and the peace that filled every moment in the garden. His voice trembles when he speaks of Eve's creation, expressing how joyful he was to receive her, how complete he felt beside her. Then Adam speaks of the fall not as a distant theological event, but as the darkest moment of his life. He recounts how the serpent deceived Eve, how he accepted the fruit, and how the divine glory that once covered them vanished in an instant. He describes the shame, the fear, and the unbearable sorrow of standing before God knowing he had disobeyed. Every detail carries emotional weight. The manuscript emphasizes that Adam recounts these moments not to condemn Eve or himself, but to teach future generations the seriousness of temptation. When Adam speaks of Abel, the entire family weeps. The Ethiopian text lingers on this moment, describing the tears of the younger children who had never met Abel but knew of his righteousness. Eve cries openly, holding her chest as if the memory still cuts into her heart. Adam pauses, letting the silence settle, and then tells them that Abel now rests with God, a reassurance that offers comfort to a grieving family. After this emotional retelling, Adam shifts to the most important part of his message. He reveals to Seth a secret that God entrusted to him, one that explains the future of humanity and the ultimate defeat of Satan. According to the Ethiopian manuscript, Adam says, "When God judged us after the fall, he also made a promise that one day, from our descendants, one will come who will crush the power of Satan completely." This is the first prophecy of redemption recorded in the manuscript. Adam explains that humanity's suffering, its trials, and its struggles are not signs of abandonment. They are part of a long story that will lead to salvation. The one who is coming, the chosen descendant, will be born in human flesh, not angelic glory, and will restore the relationship between God and humanity that Adam broke. This prophecy echoes the ancient idea found in many traditions of a coming Redeemer, but the Ethiopian text presents it with striking clarity. Seth listens intently as Adam continues, "The one who will come shall open the gates of Eden again. He shall break the curse of death. He shall defeat Satan, whose hatred was kindled against us from the beginning." The text describes Seth falling to his knees, overwhelmed by the weight of this message. Eve weeps softly, realizing that her lineage will one day bring forth redemption rather than only sorrow. The younger children look at Adam in awe, sensing the significance of his words even if they do not fully understand them. This prophecy, embedded within the Ethiopian narrative, connects Adam's ancient story directly to the future of humanity. But Adam is not yet finished. After delivering the prophecy, Adam shares a final instruction with Seth. He tells him to record everything Adam has taught: the story of Eden, the fall, the encounters with Satan, and the prophecy of the coming Redeemer. This, Adam says, must be preserved for future generations. Seth accepts the responsibility with humility, understanding that he is now the guardian of humanity's spiritual history. As Adam's strength fades, the manuscript describes something extraordinary. God sends 3 angels to stand beside Adam, Eve, and Seth. Their presence fills the room with divine light. One angel comforts Eve, who is trembling with fear at the thought of losing her husband. Another stands behind Seth, reinforcing the weight of his new role. The third approaches Adam and tells him that his time has come, and that death is not the end, it is a doorway to rest until the appointed day of resurrection. Adam smiles. After centuries of struggle, he is ready. The manuscript describes Adam's final moments with simple yet profound imagery. He turns to Eve and whispers words of love and comfort, thanking her for her companionship through sorrow and joy. He blesses his children and grandchildren. Then he closes his eyes, breathes slowly, and gives his spirit to God. The narrative emphasizes that as Adam dies, the natural world responds. The trees sway gently, a quiet wind passes through the valley. The angels remain until Adam's body grows still, then lift his soul and carry it upward. Eve collapses in tears beside his body, and the family gathers around her, mourning not only the loss of a husband and father, but the passing of the world's first human. The burial of Adam is described with solemn dignity. Seth leads the ceremony, offering prayers with a voice trembling between sorrow and reverence. Eve places her hands on Adam's chest, whispering a final goodbye. The family fills the grave slowly, lovingly, knowing that the man who taught them everything about life, God, and righteousness has returned to the earth from which he was formed. But the manuscript does not end this section in despair. Instead, it ends with a sense of purpose. Seth, now the spiritual leader of humanity, stands before the family and declares that Adam's teachings will not be forgotten. The prophecy of redemption will be remembered. The war against Satan will continue, but with hope. In Section 10, the concluding chapter, we will explore how Adam's legacy shapes early humanity, how the prophecy is passed down through generations, and how the Ethiopian manuscript frames the enduring conflict between good and evil, a conflict whose consequences stretch far into the future. Section 9 ended with the solemn passing of Adam, the first human, the first prophet, and the first witness of both divine glory and human tragedy. His death marks not an ending in the Ethiopian book of Adam and Eve, but the beginning of a larger story that carries forward through his descendants. Section 10 brings the manuscript's narrative to a thoughtful, powerful conclusion, one that connects the ancient past to the future of humanity, and reveals why Ethiopia's preservation of this book remains so significant. The narrative begins in the days following Adam's burial. Eve, heartbroken yet resilient, steps into a role she never expected, the matriarch of a rapidly expanding family. The manuscript paints a tender picture of Eve in her later years, still wise, still compassionate, and now deeply protective of the prophecy Adam entrusted to Seth. She teaches her daughters and granddaughters how to maintain peace within the growing household. She tells them stories of Eden, always with tears in her eyes, ensuring that no one forgets the perfection humanity once knew. Seth, now the spiritual head of the family, continues Adam's teachings. The Ethiopian text emphasizes that Seth becomes a figure of reverence among his siblings and their descendants. He is patient, gentle, and deeply devoted to preserving Adam's instructions. Under Seth's leadership, humanity enters a period of relative harmony. Prayers become frequent, offerings are made properly. Family members gather often to hear stories of Eden, of the angels, of the great penance in the rivers, and of the cosmic war against Satan. But this peace is fragile. The manuscript makes clear that Satan does not disappear with Adam's death. On the contrary, Satan sees the loss of Adam as an opportunity. His bitterness deepens, his desire to thwart humanity's rise intensifies. With Adam gone, Satan turns his attention to the broader human community, seeking ways to disrupt unity, weaken spiritual devotion, and corrupt future generations. One of the Ethiopian text's haunting themes is that Satan begins a strategy of distraction. He introduces desires that pull humanity's attention away from God: pride, competition, jealousy, and worldly ambition. These temptations may seem subtle in comparison to the dramatic attack Satan once brought against Adam and Eve, but they are far more dangerous on a generational scale. Small corruptions left unchallenged can, over decades and centuries, shape entire cultures. Seth recognizes this threat early on. The manuscript describes him gathering the family and warning them, "Watch your hearts always, for the enemy lurks in small thoughts before he appears in great shadows." His wisdom helps delay the spread of corruption. But the text implies that humanity's growing population becomes increasingly difficult to guide. Eve, too, senses danger as she nears the end of her life. The manuscript describes her pulling Seth aside for a final conversation, one filled with maternal urgency. She tells him that he must remain steadfast, that he must teach his siblings' children the truth, and that the prophecy Adam revealed cannot be lost. Her final tears fall not for herself, but for the future of humanity. When Eve eventually passes away, the manuscript portrays her death as peaceful but deeply sorrowful for her family. Seth leads her burial with reverence, laying her to rest beside Adam. Their graves become the first sacred site in human history, a place of remembrance, tradition, and reflection. After Eve's passing, the focus shifts entirely to Seth and the generations that follow him. The Ethiopian narrative briefly outlines how Seth marries, fathers children, and establishes the lineage known in many traditions as the sons of God, a line marked by spiritual devotion and moral integrity. These descendants preserve Adam's teachings, maintain rituals of sacrifice, and pass down the prophecy of the coming Redeemer. Meanwhile, Cain's descendants continue to diverge. Living far from Seth's community, they developed tools, cities, and early human arts but devoid of spiritual grounding. The manuscript suggests that Satan exerts increasing influence over them, encouraging violence, selfishness, and the pursuit of earthly power. This split between Seth's righteous lineage and Cain's corrupted lineage sets the stage for the moral landscape that appears later in biblical and apocryphal traditions. Yet despite growing corruption among Cain's descendants, the Ethiopian book of Adam and Eve closes with a message of profound hope. The prophecy Adam revealed of a coming Redeemer, who will defeat Satan, becomes the centerpiece of the manuscript's conclusion. Seth takes this prophecy seriously, treating it not as myth but as the guiding truth for all humanity. The text describes Seth gathering his children and grandchildren around him as Adam once did, and passing on the prophecy word for word. He tells them that humanity's journey will be long and difficult, that the world will change, nations will rise and fall, and evil will often appear victorious. But he assures them that God's promise is unbreakable. One day, a descendant born of their line will appear, one whose mission will restore what Adam lost, reopen the path to divine glory, and destroy Satan's power forever. This future Redeemer, Seth says, will not come with armies or earthly power. Instead, he will come with humility, compassion, and divine authority. Seth's voice trembles with emotion as he explains that this Redeemer will suffer greatly for humanity. He will carry the burden of their mistakes. He will heal the rift between humanity and God, and through his victory, the gates of Eden closed since the moment of the fall will one day open again. It is an astonishing moment in the manuscript, because it takes the story of Adam and Eve beyond the confines of ancient myth. It transforms their narrative into the foundation of a sweeping, multi-generational prophecy that echoes through later religious tradition. The Ethiopian text ends not with a detailed history of Seth's descendants, but with a reflective commentary on the nature of human life. It emphasizes that humanity's journey is defined by the tension between two forces, divine purpose and satanic opposition. Adam's legacy, preserved through Seth, is the understanding that humans are not passive participants in this cosmic struggle, they are central to it. Their choices shape the future, their devotion strengthens the divine plan. Their failures open doors for corruption, and above all, their hope rests in the promised Redeemer whose coming will mark the turning point of human history. In its final lines, the manuscript returns to the theme that has guided the entire narrative, the importance of remembering Eden, remembering the fall, remembering Satan's hatred, remembering God's mercy, and remembering the prophecy that will one day change everything. As the Ethiopian book of Adam and Eve concludes, the reader is left with a powerful impression, one of ancient wisdom preserved through millennia, hidden from much of the world, and now rediscovered. Its message is both haunting and hopeful, haunting in its portrayal of humanity's vulnerability, its exposure to spiritual manipulation, and its repeated failures. Hopeful in its insistence that despite all of this, God's plan will prevail. The book ends with a simple but profound assurance: humanity may struggle, but it will not be abandoned. The adversary may rage, but he will not triumph. The story that began in Eden will one day find its fulfillment in redemption. And that is the enduring legacy of Adam and Eve as preserved in Ethiopia, a legacy of sorrow, struggle, prophecy, and unstoppable hope. The rediscovery of the Ethiopian book of Adam and Eve invites us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about humanity's earliest story. It reveals a world of cosmic conflict, divine purpose, and a legacy that stretches far beyond Eden's gates. Through Adam's struggles, Eve's resilience, and Seth's unwavering devotion, we see the roots of a spiritual journey that continues through every generation. These ancient pages remind us that our story is not one of despair, but of enduring hope, a hope anchored in the promise of redemption and the certainty that humanity was never abandoned. If you found this exploration fascinating, enlightening, or eye-opening, make sure to give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who loves history, mystery, and ancient revelations. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories like this to life. Stay curious, stay inspired, and until next time, thank you for watching.